Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be analyzing the early life of Illumi Zoldyck on Analysis with Ro, where we basically analyze everything. So today's episode again is going to refer to the early life, aka Illumi's childhood, and just some inferences about it, and just whatever else that we have for today will be around that topic. Let's break it down and get into it. So with the assassin Illumi Zoldyck, we have an approximation for the birthday. Again, not exactly accurate because we don't actually know. I had to assume. So with me, my assumption or approximation is specifically September 9th, 1996. Now, I use the modern day for the mathematics that I have. However, if you're someone who more so follows the 90s version of everything, then of course it would probably be 1976, in which the character, instead of being in like their 20s, now would be more so around like their 40s. So if that's the one you're following, I'm not saying that you're incorrect. Both of these are correct. It just depends on which lane you're going through. I'm using modern day. So that is the timeline that I'm specifically using, right? Everything today and onward. And the area, now that we're continuing on, is in the Republic of Padokia. Again, the conversion best for the type of area the Republic of Padokia would be in is basically Algeria. It's our version of Algeria. So like in our world, it would be Algeria. In their world, it's the Republic of Padokia. So that is where Illumi Zoldyck was born, and of course, what day and year. To parents, Kikyo and Silva Zoldyck. So, the Zoldyck family has lived for generations on Kukuru Mountain, which again is a dormant volcano in the Republic of Padokia's Dentora region that stands 3.722 meters or 12,211 feet tall. In other words, that's a tall as fuck mountain. Put it simply. Okay? High up there. So, the butlers, who are masters of martial arts, and Mike, their enormous dog-like beast, guards the perimeters of their entire fortified estate, which is encircled by massive stone walls. So we all have seen the pictures, and if you have not, it's within the manga, right, of basically that image of mountains, a gate, a huge dog, which is basically imagine Clifford the big red dog, except now the dog is no longer red. I'm pretty sure Clifford is a Labrador as far as his breed goes. So instead of a Labrador, now it's a Borzoi or a Russian Wolfhound. And the color is now white. So no longer red, white. It's a Borzoi. And it's just huge shit. So like, again, a Clifford-sized dog. But the dog is now a big white Borzoi. You're seeing the picture? Yeah, that's basically it. Oh, and the paws are a little bit larger to accommodate for the large size. Yeah. You're seeing it now? Yeah, there we go. Kind of cute, kind of scary. Yeah, that's the image. Massive stone walls. So like there's that whole entire picture. That's the place. That's where he came from. So Illumi and his siblings grew up in complete seclusion. Their faces are hidden from the public. So like people know their names, or at least somewhat know. It's a bit cloudy as far as everybody knowing their names. They know enough, right? But they don't know their faces. They don't have any attachments to their faces. So you might as well be talking about a motherfucking ghost or like a legend or a myth of some kind. Like, oh, you're talking about this, but because I've never seen any images of proof, you know, these people might as well not exist. Type of vibe that we're going with. So there's that. And none of the Zoldyck family members are like known. Like they're, again, names are known, kind of, sort of. It's a little bit cloudy for everybody, except of course those that are within the criminal world. But as far as everybody else, like the average person will be like, I don't even know these people like exist for real. Like, couldn't care less. That's the type of vibe. Again, you might as well be saying that a ghost is out here existing, because it's like, I never seen these niggas out in public ever. If you were to tell me like, oh, that's that person, I would be like, oh, that's kind of scary. But again, unless you're specifically a person in which an assassin would be chasing you, so like a politician or whoever, like the average person is not being chased down by politicians, by politicians and by assassins. So if you're not being chased down by that, or that's not the lifestyle in which you live, then you probably would be like, girl, what? I don't care. And that just be the truth. But yeah, so they are mostly known, kind of, sort of. Like, it's infamy. But, like, you don't know that person's face. Like, even with the rich people that we have today, like, for example, Jeff Bezos, we know what Jeff Bezos looks like. He a bald egghead. You know, he bald, look like an egg. But we know what he look like. So there's that. Anyways, the family's elders isolate them for their own safety, mostly, as a single photograph can fetch millions of dollars. So again, it's not like there's absolutely no reason. There is. And they are vulnerable to bounty hunters. So growing up in complete isolation, though, it's got its drawbacks. As well as growing up as a Zoldyck, it's got its drawbacks. We talked about some of them already. But here today, we're going to specifically talk about how that affects a young mind. So let's go investigate how isolation, amongst a lot of other things that are just so Zoldyck-esque, can impact Illumi's childhood. So with that being said, let's roll, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Now that we've gone into the intro, let's get right into the rest of the whole thing. Alright, so when talking about Illumi, the first thing that we have to establish is the isolation, the sheltered living. Now, isolation may have been one of the many difficulties that this character has faced as a child. It certainly did not help that this entire experience for this character was just incredibly lonely, to say the very least. They were discouraged from making friends, from the whole rule of assassins don't make friends, because you'll want to kill them in the end, right? So discouraged from any other interpersonal connections involving friends. I can't even say like acquaintances, you know, like just any kind of outside relationships just were not allowed for not just this character, but it seems like everybody employed there, which we'll talk about how violating that is like a workplace rule. We'll probably talk about that later when we do the Zoldyck family as a whole, kind of like their workplace regulations and how many they broke, because there was a lot in which they broke, but you know, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, but this is just one of the few rules that they discussed, which was introduced to the audience. But why would such a rule exist? Perhaps, again, when we talked about like narcissistic family models and how essentially the image of perfection must be kept up. We know good and well that perfection is not actually there, but they want the illusion of perfection there. And having that outside influence, one who has the potential to like unravel Zoldyck household teachings, I mean, it could just like have everything crumble apart. I think a good example of this outside of the Zoldyck family and how this could also be shown in real life is anybody who watches like their cults or fundamentalist families or anything like that. Of course, there's the famous Duggar family, but there are a lot of other examples. I believe Netflix has like multiple documentaries. One was called Keep It Sweet, Pray Away, something like that in the title. And it was more so talking about, I believe, a facet of Mormonism that was very extreme and very cult-like, and how they had like some people escape by either like their friends or somebody else on the outside that basically said from the person from the inside, hey, yo, shit is weird. Basically is what they said. Of course, they said it in a more elaborate way. I'm not just gonna say, yo, shit is weird, but that's ultimately what they said. Your shit is weird. Have you ever considered that, none of what you believe is normal? Things like that, that the outside influence might say, that could be like, whoa, I never thought of it like that. That's so crazy. So of course, on one hand, it'd be like, oh, they were just protecting da 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 da. But it's like, there's such a thing as, like overprotection, as doing too much. Your kids are going to experience the world one way or another. You can't protect them from everything. Even if you want to argue it comes from a good place, it doesn't matter what the intent was. The result was, without like other human interaction, without that social interaction to kind of practice with as kids are supposed to, you kind of stunt your kids' growth. Sometimes, like I said before, you gotta let kids fall on their face. You got to. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, so anyways, according to this household, you can't let your kids believe that life is more important than what you have predestined them to be. So in this case, right, and a lot of other cases too, they have a certain way of living, and this is the quote-unquote perfect way of living. You can only live this way. You don't have the opportunity, the chance to explore and figure out what you want to do. That's not something that happens within, again, not just this household, but again, a lot of households that tend to have this narcissistic model in mind. So education was another means of isolating Illumi completely. The Zoldyck children went through a process called training. It's pretty much torture, but yeah, during this entire process, they are taught midrastinum, which is poison resistance, pain resistance, and a variety of other techniques to prepare them for the dangerous world of assassination, which I might have to emphasize once again, they didn't really have a choice in the matter. And the methods used to teach these lessons, on the other hand, may be viewed as inhumane. So let me talk about the whole choice in the matter kind of thing, right? Because I feel like a lot of people will be like, oh, what other way could there have been? Multiple, actually. And there's plenty of other medias, fictional, in this case, I'm going to use fictional examples that show that you can have like superpowered kids and all of that and not have them be absolutely traumatized. That is a possibility. I believe for some people, you might be thinking of like The Incredibles, for example, right? Which like all the kids seemingly join in, right? Their parents are like, okay, y'all can come along. There is training, but there's no form of torture to it. And honestly, if the kids want to opt out, they can. That is option 1, the Incredible method. Option 2, Spy Kids, which is basically you hide the fact that, all the adults within the business are doing this thing, and all the kids like go to school and do all their stuff. And then if they just so happen to find out, like for whatever reason, it'd be like, okay, you can either join or you don't have to join, right? Like you can continue doing what you were doing before, which is school, or you can join and here's all the things that you need to do in order to join. Torture not required. And I feel like, let me bring in my own perspective for the whole torture not required, right? I come from the arts, right? I grew up within the arts, entertainment industry, whatnot. I grew up within that field, right? I've seen both good sides, bad sides, horrendous sides. For the horrendous sides, where you have like all these parents, and you've seen some of the documentaries, like all these parents force their kids into this particular thing. There's multiple tactics, which you could argue is torture or not. Just all these horrendous, inhumane stuff that's going on with these kids, right? And then later down the line, I mean, Jeanette McCurdy was one of the people that came out after all of this and just went like, hey, acting is not a passion no more. I think it was Millie Millie Bobby Brown, right, that came out being like, acting's not really a passion. I have a prediction, if you will, as to why that's the case. From what I hear, she's been in there since she was young. Like I said, never really had the choice to really do anything else. So it's only natural for people who've been within a field in which they have little choice of being in. Like their parents just, here you go, this is the job you have now. There was no choice in the matter. It was not their own decision. Like, it's like, hey, the adults around me say it's a good idea, so I guess it's a good idea. It's only natural that, again, if it's not your own idea, you're going to get bored. You're going to get sick of it. And you hear this a lot of the case, even with like, Michael Jackson at times, right? When you look back at some of the old documentaries and the old interviews he had, you could tell, like, if there was a choice to do something else, he probably would have done something else. Or if he would have continued down the lane in which he went, he probably would have went about it a different way. There's plenty of information about his father and how abusive his father was, right? So there's just a lot of real life examples that just go to show you can't force your kids to do a certain thing. Like, either they want to do it or they don't want to do it. And you can't be like, oh my God, why you want to quit? Da 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 da. Because they've been working at it since they were like, have itty bitty baby hands, like straight from the womb. You didn't really give them any other options. I would be sick of the same shit too. And I didn't get to decide whether or not I wanted to do this shit. You just sprang it on me. Like, damn. This is why people need options. I digress. Let's keep moving on. So, like, again, isolation, just having that, isolating your victim. I mean, this is a common tactic too, right? That a lot of abusers tend to have. And in this case, it would be like your family unit, kind of just like isolating you from being like, there's nothing else out there. This is the only option. We want you to do A, B, C, and D. It's completely fine. Until it isn't, right? Until you go and experience the outside world, because that's what eventually happens. You can't keep them in there forever, right? It's like eventually they have to work. And one or the other, while they're working, especially in this case with assassination, and they're traveling all over the world, they're going to bump into that one person that's like, hey, did you have a choice in this matter? Like, they talk to them more and more, and then sooner or later they accidentally have a quote unquote friend. And it's just like, shit, you know? I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to have that, but we're gonna talk even more about like the twisted early education right about now, right? Because after the isolation, after just keeping it in one place, you also have the twisted early education. But before we get to that, one thing that I do want to discuss is the whole, not just sheltered. Let's expand the sheltered part, right? Because for this particular character, right, you have Silva and Kikyo coming in, right? You have Kikyo basically being like isolated away from the family, kind of just ostracized from the family, right? Because she doesn't belong. 9 times out of 10, I'm pretty sure that Silva had an arranged wife, that he basically denied, and everything was just out of whack. It's like, nah, you're not even supposed to do that. You're supposed to follow every single tradition. And he didn't do that. That was his one small rebellion that he did, but he didn't complete it, in my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, I don't know if this constitutes as like completely victim blaming or not. I don't think so, question mark. But like, he brought in somebody else. So in this case, you know what? I'm not gonna completely feel bad, because he brought somebody else into his family's mess, and that I cannot tolerate. Like, it's one thing for you to be like, oh yes, my family's a mess and a half, right? They probably are not going to accept you. If you are bringing in a partner that you know good and well your family is not going to accept, one or two things are you gonna do? You gotta pick and choose. You have to. Because, like, your family is probably gonna hate your partner forever, type of thing. Like, on some petty shit, they probably will. Like, you see, for example, on TikTok, these crazy boy moms be doing this, that, and the third. And if you keep telling them, hey, stop messing with my partner like that, and they still messing with them. They still like, I don't like that bitch, whatever. The third, eventually you have to cut your family off. Like, slowly, mind you, I'm not saying automatically, like quickly. I know with family, things can be a lot more complicated and harder. Definitely not quickly, but like eventually, you know, like you have your partner trying their absolute best, and you know good and well that your family's just gonna be like, I don't like this woman. She's evil to that and the third. I hate her. And not only that, with like the family, you also have like the butlers being the same way, being like, ugh, this bitch. Like, eventually you got to feel the hostility. I mean, you got to. So here she comes, right? The hostility is felt. She's not really welcome there. She births a child that looks exactly like her, the first kid. And the first kid is just feeling the hatred. I mean, like with Siobhan, I hate her too, but I haven't talked about her enough. I should have. But just know I don't like her either, because you got beef with somebody straight from the womb, like a child, all because they look like just like their mom. Like, that's a sign of some stupid ass petty shit, right? Again, kind of on that boy mom type shit, except she's not really a boy mom, but I guess, you know, because she kind of raised Silva, kind of, sorta, it would somewhat constitute as that, right? And when I'm talking boy mom, I don't mean like a mom that just happens to have a boy. I mean boy mom, copyright infringement, you feel me? Or whatever that symbol is called. Just like that special kind. For some of you, you know what I'm talking about. Like emotional incest type. Except in this case, it's not really that at all. But the feeling is still there. Because it's like, it's over this, it's over that. When you look at that man in real life, it'd be like, all this praise for that nigga? What are we doing? What are we doing? He's like, ew, huh? It's like, he's simply the greatest. Simply the greatest. He's a menace to society. I mean, his poor wife. Don't know what she's gotten herself into. And then you got the first kid straight from the womb being like, I hate that little bitch. It'd be like, what did I do? What did they do? What did I do? You know, it's like, I hate that little bitch. It's like, I just got here. You mad at me because I look like my mama. Like, that's crazy. It's crazy. Anyways, let's continue on. Twisted early education of a Zoldyck. Speaking of which, it's possible that the unusual Zoldyck family used unconventional educational methods, alright? So the levels that were discussed within the book, the different levels that Silva imposed, based on how enraged he's been by the situation, as mentioned by one of the butlers, Goto, in episode 140, and of course in the manga pages that accompany that episode. So level 4, which is essentially censorship and heavy supervision of a subject, is one of the levels mentioned, and a violation of level 4 would result in the subject's immediate capture. Level 5, which is an escalation of level 4, is also mentioned in episode 140. So the subject is forbidden from leaving the Zoldyck estate. If they do, they will be stopped immediately and possibly face harsher punishments. Now, the comparison that I make, sit down, lock in, it's gonna make sense, okay? The punishment that this could best compare to, or what this best compares to, these levels are very similar to how like children are managed in troubled teen schools. Now, I've been doing some research about troubled teen disciplinary schools. Some of them still exist. I believe like Danielle Bergoli talked about one that still exists, if you have listened to what she said about them. Also Paris Hilton talked about her experience in there. They're torture schools, put it simply, and we're going to get more into that. So like, for example, Elan, which is a notorious behavior modification school, it's another name for it. It's used to keep its students confined with guards, and any attempt to flee would result in severe, and I mean absolutely severe, consequences. So according to a former student, it was designed to dehumanize and demoralize the students who went there, with the goal of destroying their individuality and turning them into obedient slaves, which I would argue is the exact same tactic that honestly the Zoldyck family tends to do. Because God forbid people want to be employed with their own free will. Nah, you gotta kind of force them into being employed for this specific unit. It's fucking crazy. It's crazy. Know what I mean? Let's keep going. So a part of that behavior is shown in Illumi. So he states in chapter 330 that he's willing to sacrifice his own needs for the sake of the family. So, after a while, that kind of brainwashing just kind of settles in. Clicker clackers with the brain in the wrong way. You ain't clicker clackering right. So a variety of modification methods could have been used for the Zoldicks as well. And let's talk about some of those modification methods, right? One, such as the contradictory rules for speaking too little and too loudly, right? Kind of having that back and forth, which, as we talked about, ends up giving you stuff like disorganized attachment and whatnot, right? So all of that kind of back and forth, that kind of instability, eventually gives you a mind in which you're a little confused about everything. Like, I don't know what to believe. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Like, I just must be wrong all the goddamn time, because if I speak too little, I get punished. If I speak too loud, I get punished. Like, you can't win in this bitch. Which would have resulted, again, in severe consequences. Like, it will be literally the most small, inconsequential shit, like, in anywhere else. And here, everything's just taken to the extreme. As well as being attracted to someone, resulting to insults, not falling asleep, or sleeping too long. So again, the whole not having friends thing, I think it goes a step beyond being like, unless we arrange a specific marriage for you, whatever, you cannot be talking to like anybody else. And because again of the trans theory that I have earlier, in this case, for anyone born with essentially a femme body, I believe those rules are taken to the absolute extreme. So in Illumi's case, it might have been a little bit worse, being like, hell no, you can't be talking to anybody, especially of the opposite gender. Like, I've watched like one documentary for like one of these disciplinary schools, and the absolute fucking insanity of the shit. Like, it will make you just sit there and be like, what? Like, really, just like, what? It's ridiculous. And they expect after all of that to be like, yes, this is policy, gonna be a well-rounded civilian and not a motherfucking serial killer. Like, if that's how I grew up, surprised I haven't stabbed anybody my damn self. Like, that would be insane. Responding to insults, again, not falling asleep or sleeping too long. So again, responding to insults specifically is like the verbal abuse aspect. If you respond back, you get punished. Like, I know some people who probably had that in their own house, in which like your parents will verbally abuse you and there's nothing that you could do about it, because like if you try to like fight back or defend yourself, you're just gonna get hit for like doing what any other human being would do, which is like fucking defend yourself. So like not falling asleep or sleeping too long, you're not performing well academically, you're having any bad thoughts, quote unquote, meaning again, thoughts that go outside of the expectations they set for you, and just many others. So like punishments for those bad behaviors may include, and I'm putting bad in quotations because like a lot of these are just like normal human things, but like they don't expect you to be human. They expect you to be like a robot slave or some shit like that. But punishment for bad behavior may include, but not limited to, abandonment in desolate areas. So we looked at the dungeon, and again, that is the best way to describe it. They also have like abandonment in desolate areas. The dungeon, but also they could just might as well throw them in the fucking forest and be like, bitch, figure it out. Like, we're in the middle of the forest, you get eaten by a bear. No pun intended. If you know, you know, it's like eaten by a bear, whatever. Good luck. And speaking of which, adding on top of that, that might have been like a few instances in which like the wilderness might as well be this character's best friend. It'd be like, listen, I may be outside in the cold alone, but at least, there's not like as many scars. Like, at least I'm not getting like hit every 2.5 seconds. Like, the forest is nice. Like, the animals are nice. Like, I'd rather be out here. Shit. Like, that's kind of sad. You know, you have like these guardians, people that are supposed to give you a home, but not just give you a home, like a home, a place filled with like love and warmth and all that other stuff. It's just not there. I mean, it's just not the Zoldyck expectation, and in all actuality, that's probably the most saddest shit. But we're gonna keep going because it gets worse, right? Wrist and ankle cuffs, which again could best be compared to the dungeon. Dunce caps. I'll probably show a picture later of what dunce caps are, but just basically embarrassment, right? Like public embarrassment. Solitary confinement, which there's been some recent research about solitary confinement and how, no surprise, because humans are social creatures, the lack of social interactions, it will fuck with your brain. Put it simply, it'll make a person more crazier. I don't know why prisons still do it. Actually, I do know why, sadly, but we'll talk about the industrial prison complex in way later. Someday we'll get there. But solitary confinement, attack therapy, which basically is like a mixture of verbal and physical harassment from not just, in this case, the parents, but like other people as well. And we see some clues to that, where it's like you have the servants sometimes would attack you. Sometimes it would be your own siblings attacking each other. And you could also add this to be a mixture of attack therapy and triangulation in this case, right? Kind of being like, see, if you don't do this, that, and the third, then all these other people are going to be like against you. So you better stay in your fucking place. Like, this shit's a cult. There's no other way to describe it. You've got beratement of personal issues. So basically being like, how do I best describe this? I guess the best recent example is, like Meet the Grams from Kendrick Lamar. Basically having your own version of that, so your own personal version of that, where they just air out all your personal issues over and over and over again. But there's no cool beat behind it. There's no cool music. It's just people insulting you for days on end for shit that they consider flaws. Eventually you might consider it flaws. So I guess Illumi's case, it might be a mixture of all kinds of things. It could be like appearance, being like, you're not the perfect image of what we were going for. Giving a fuck ton of body issues. It might be, you might be like, oh my god, you are like a fucking airhead, you dumb bitch. And it's just like shit like that, I'm just saying some examples out there. Like, I don't know. It could probably be like way worse. I'm just giving a few. And whipping, which we already seen within the series. I don't think that's much of a shock either, me talking about it, because we've already seen examples of that too. Among other potential like torture techniques. Like, there's all kinds of torture techniques out there that exist. Humans are sadly creative when it comes to the destruction of our fellow beings. That's another discussion for another day, but like, good grief. However, the Zoldicks also demand a normal curriculum for teaching their children, because again, their children have to be intelligent. So like, torture aside, we still gotta have smart kids too, right? Because they gotta be the absolute best of the best. So they also have a curriculum for teaching their children assassination methods, as well as like probably Dentora approved material with lessons from like KGB training manual, which is a training manual specifically for, I believe, like Russian or just Soviet in general training manual that they had, which I believe the Zoldicks probably have also used. So the program appears to be a cross between KGB training and homeschooling with professional tutors, right? So a mixture of both that kind of training, the quote-unquote training, aka torture, that we discussed a little earlier, and homeschooling combined. So the schedule might have looked something like this, right? So we have, this is what I imagine the schedule to be. So you have the Zoldyck class schedule, what I predicted to be. You got 6 o'clock to 6:45 in the morning. They probably arriving at a school building. Now, what I saw before was like, oh, the butlers and the maids, they have like their own version of school building for training and stuff like that. I believe because of how this house is built, they probably have their own for their kids, right? So like there's separate buildings. It's like, the butlers and maids go here. Like our own children would go here with their own tutors, and they would go there for like, their own like teachings and stuff like that. So they arrive at that area, and then 7 to 7:30 they're gonna be breakfast, because you still gotta eat. Like despite all that, you still gotta eat. You got 7:30 to 8:30, you got DLA, which is Dentorian Language Arts. See what I did there? I'm so smart. Alright, 8:30 to 9 a.m. you got foreign languages, so that means anything else. You got like anything else like Spanish, you know, Italian, whatever. Of course, probably like the other languages that are probably more important to them, which would probably be like, in this case, considering my predictions of them in like Eastern European Jewish and Chinese before KKO arrived. So there would probably be like Chinese being the main priority along with Yiddish. There's that. So just all those foreign languages. And then you got 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., which is etiquette. You got like 10 a.m. to 10:30, which is science. You got 10:30 to 10:50, which is break time. Because, you know, still gotta rest. It's 20 minutes. It's like, after all that, it's like, you still gotta rest. Because, like, I guess here's a breakthrough, right? For, like, a lot of these kinds of houses. There are such a thing as, like, good moments. That doesn't mean, like, ultimately the whole experience was good. But you're gonna have, like, quote-unquote, good moments. Right? Because abusers understand, even, that you can't, like, torture 24/7 or you're just gonna automatically snap a person. You gotta slowly reel them in with good stuff. You gotta make them believe, like, oh, there's good things here. How are they gonna believe that if there's no good things here? So you gotta bring in, like, some kind of appeasement, being like, there's some good things here. You gotta lure them in with all that. I mean, if that wasn't the case, right, if it was just torture 24/7, then love bombing wouldn't be a thing. You know what I mean? So let's keep it going. Keep it a buck, keep it a stack. So you got 11 a.m. to 11:45, you got mathematics. Then you got 11:45 a.m. to 12 p.m., you got history. You got 12 p.m. to 12:45, you got lunch. Because you still got to eat. Then you got 1 to 1:30, you got physical education. Imagine physical education with, you know, the Zoldycks. Interesting shit. You know what I mean? Interesting shit. And then probably at 2 p.m. for them, it will be the end. And then they'll go back to like maybe other kinds of training, maybe not. And also, I did not say this, but this is scheduled pre-K to 4th grade. So this is like before they would probably start working. Because I don't think they started like working from the gap. I said the womb, but I said that in a metaphorical sense, right? I didn't mean that like literally. I think they still have some time to be like, okay, you have like this moment to kind of be like a kid and kind of train early, but you're not really going to be in the field until you're a little bit older. I mean, still young in our personal opinion, but like old enough. Like double digits, you know what I mean? It's like pre-K to 4th grade, so like in the single digits essentially. They're not going to be like anywhere near the field yet. It's like they're a little young for the field. You're going to wait till you're like a good 10 years old or whatever before you're really out there, you know, learning and being an apprentice and all that other stuff. So before then, you're just going to be in the house and having that kind of education. So this is where they start getting into the field, right? So everything starts changing because now you're in the field. You got 5th grade to high school. So in this case, you got 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. They arriving at the school building. You got 7 a.m. to 7:20 a.m. They got breakfast. You got 7:30 all the way to 7:45. You got tutoring and homework. Then you got 8 a.m. to 8:45. They got weapon training. 9 a.m. to 9:30 intelligence training, which is basically spying, espionage. You got 10 a.m. to 10:45 martial arts. 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. first aid training. 12 p.m. to 12:45 you got lunch. You got 1 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. You got Nen training, 1:45 to 2 p.m. You got navigation. So basically anything like maps and stuff like that. You know, you got like 2 p.m. to 2:45. You got flexibility training. You know those specific videos for like rhythmic gymnastics? Yeah, imagine that. It's not fun. Bones will be broken. Yeah. And then you got like 3 p.m. extracurricular time, which is basically other classes such as like maybe dance, maybe poison resistance would fit under extracurricular, as would like experimentations with limits of the human body. Some more torture. Fun. And again, we got this all adjusted for assassination training because probably by this time is when they officially get into the field. So they probably have specific times, right? Because everything has to be organized. Again, you can't just torture out the motherfucking gat. You gotta give people a minute before you put that torture on them. That's not a good thing. I'm just saying what might be the case. Alright? I'm not agreeing. I'm just saying what might be the case. Now, Illumi more likely went through the dictatorial educational system, which is very similar again to the Algerian education system because it's their version of Algeria. So primary school would come first, followed by secondary school, and then finally university. So their curriculum would heavily rely on lectures and memorizations for instructions, and in order to graduate from primary school, students must pass a test known as the brevet d'enseignement fondamental. So for secondary school, they would need to pass the baccalaureate examination. So schooling could include, like, I say Hebrew, but I'm nervous to say it now, so I'm going to switch it and say Yiddish, which would take place primarily on Sundays and would focus on learning Jewish customs, because again, Eastern European Jewish, so like reading the Torah and religious ceremonies, in addition to following the region's standardized education. Now again, this is for reference. I'm not trying to demonize anybody who's like has learned that language and it's like, hey, I'm not like that. If you know, you know. I understand that, but due to everything that's kind of going on, of course, I just want to keep it safe, right? I just want to keep it a buck, keep it safe, and just try to clean up as much as possible, you feel me? So if you see me replacing certain terms, that's why. So the combination of all previously stated teachings could not have been easy to keep. Teachings, I should say. So what exactly did it take to keep such teachings of a developing mind? Now, it could not have been gentle, it could not have been easy, so what could it have been? What could it have been? So the first teachers in a young person's life will always be their parents. However, the guidance was given to Illumi might not have been the best. So in the following sections, we'll look at Kikyo and Silva Zoldyck parenting styles and how they shape the mind of a young Zoldyck. Now, who do I think teached Illumi Zoldyck and specifically all of this stuff? Of course, you have Godo probably being one of the main teachers. There were probably a couple of others in there, unnamed. I don't really remember their names. They were never named. So what other workers were there? Probably were unnamed teachers, right? Godo was probably the main one. I'm not sure if Shabone did it, considering the dislike of like the children that mostly look like the mom. Petty fucking reasons. Hate that bitch. We'll get into my hatred in a minute. Not as much as I hate Silva, but she a fucking, if we're gonna say like enablers within the family, compared to the other two that I've described earlier, she's probably worse than both of them combined. Cause at least with them, there's a reason to fear. And I guess with her, kinda sorta, cause like that's your employer, I guess. But like there's no other nice way to say this. And I guess this is a graphic image. She be riding Silva's dick. She be riding this nigga's dick. And it's just like, it makes me sick a lot of the times. Cause she be excusing some absolute bullshit. But, you know, that's neither here nor more about how I feel about Shabone. I'll probably do a whole entire rant episode about her too. Fuck that bitch. So anyways, this next chapter is going to be dark and cold parenting, so stay tuned for that. For right now, let's take a minute, take a break, because I know this has been a pretty long piece to what we were talking about. everybody, welcome back. Now we got to talk about this next part. So parents are their children's shepherd, right? After all, they are there to teach their children how to navigate the world, teach them right from wrong, and all these other life lessons. So what happens, however, when the guidance leads you astray? What happens when the sheep are brought to slaughter? Well, this could only lead to negative outcomes, damage that will require years of therapy to repair. Parents are not faultless, and they make mistakes, understandable, but you can only justify a certain amount of behavior for as long as it's an accident. See, one must have a great deal of empathy and understanding to raise another person. See, unfortunately, not all parents are equipped to raise their kids in a way that's both safe and effective. So in this specific section that we're going to dive into right now, we will explore the parenting styles of both Kikyo and Silver Zoldyck, and the negative outcomes their parenting styles have on Illumi right here, because of this character study being mostly about him. So let's first talk about Kikyo, right? An interesting woman. Kikyo Zoldyck, intriguing woman. See, at the tender age of what is approximately, I would say, 18, she married off into this aristocratic Zoldyck family. See, the transition from the cold and impoverished lands of Meteor City to an environment of grandiose wealth will undoubtedly be difficult. How could such a woman demonstrate her worth to such a family? In my opinion, not that she... Honestly, shit, you know what? Different discussion, different day. We'll get into that. But for now, let's just take this into effect. You're trying to prove worth to the family because, let's be honest, you probably weren't their choice in the first place, right? You just came up there, your son picked up, according to the Zoldicks, it's like this boy out here picking up this girl, where the hell she came from. He rejected our arranged wife for him. Like, oh my god, everything's going to shit. Like, and then she comes in. So now in a way, Kikyo has to prove herself, right? Because all the odds are against her. So that would probably require the adoption of new morals and complacency towards behavior that is questionable at best and downright horrendous at worst. Because again, she wasn't born into this life. She got brought into this life. Versus the arranged partner who probably already knew from the jump what to do. Doesn't have to be taught over and over again. Because she already knew this is the type of shit we be on. This is the program we're on. Ain't nothing else. So the Zoldyck family, right, is a family that has blood money on their hands. And we know that already. Quite literally in this case, ingrained in its roots. It would appear that in order to keep your family in place, you would have to be ordained to a role and keep it, right? So everybody, again, we talked about this with the dysfunctional family podcast episode about each and every person's role within the family. So no matter what the consequences are, you just have to keep your ass in line. Stay in the box. That's the key thing for this family, right? For this very dysfunctional, meshed family. So let's continue on. So the role that Kikyo was ready to take on was motherhood. She was going to be the next Zoldyck wife. So the way she mothers her children, however, is extremely suffocating. And this has been referenced more than once. So it's almost like she has kind of this desperate grip. And the fears that if she lets go, she will lose everything that she holds dear. There was another character study I was looking into of a mom that's very similar to that. It's from an old 2000 show, but she was very similar to that, right? Because like, she got here, she got this wealth this way, and she'll be damned if she has that wealth taken away from her, has this opportunity of prosperity taken away from her. Sadly, a lot of parents are like that, right? Where they let the money get to them. I ain't gonna lie to you, they let the money get to them. So some evidence of her overbearing nature begins when we are introduced to her character in chapter 42 of Hunter x Hunter, where she interacts with Illumi's brother, Killua's friends, Killua and his friends, she makes it appear in that exchange that Killua's decision to return to the family and avoid speaking to his friends was made by his own free will, with his own consent. So that wasn't the truth though, right? In fact, it was her orders to Illumi to bring Killua back home and her bringing him to the basement for punishment. So that was all, to keep everything in line. Because again, heaven be damned if everybody was outside the box. It's like, we can't have anybody out the box that they were placed in, even though you can't really place humans in a box. But I digress. Yeah, but anyways, back to the basement for punishment. And we then see this a little later in the chapter in which she interacts with Silva. And then she clearly is distressed about her lack of control over Killua's development. So she exhibits some traits of a narcissistic parent, but she's not one. And we're going to talk about that. I say here traits of a narcissistic parent, but it's not narcissism, it's BPD. And I'll probably talk more about that when I get into her character study. But just know that I'm going to probably be replacing the term narcissistic with just someone with a personality disorder in general. So just a parent with a personality disorder, right? Since we're talking about it, is incredibly possessive of their children in general. And with the case of BPD, we'll talk more about the difference, right? In a little bit, hopefully sometime soon. Don't know when. But all you need to know is that in general, especially with cluster Bs, they tend to be incredibly possessive of their children, and they fear their child gaining any form of independence. That is a commonality. So some signs of this kind of parenting in general, in this case, I'm just going to say the generalized personality disorders in general, would include, but are not limited to, laying blame on others for any potential issues they may cause, making you feel guilty by boasting about how much they've done for you, displaying sudden mood changes and volatile anger, and again, kind of that switching that happens, especially with like BPD. We'll get more into that, right? Disclaimer, obviously not trying to demonize anybody who has a disorder, but especially if it's like untreated, it shows its worst of moments if it's left untreated, and this seems to be the case here. So again, if you're trying to genuinely do better, if you're not trying to do anything to genuinely harm anybody, it's like you are out here being like, that's not me, I completely get it, I understand your journey, keep living, keep prospering. Not talking about you, right? We're talking about someone who has left it untreated, and unfortunately it has caused harm to not only herself but also her children. This is a completely different conversation. Not out here trying to demonize anybody with the disorder itself. Continuing on with that, being raised by such a parent in general, right? Especially, again, parents that have personality disorders, in her case with BPD, it can have that negative consequence, such as being indecisive, considering that the child's been conditioned to think about their parents' needs over their own. Because last time, again, we talked about that parentification. See how it's making a comeback? See how it's making sense? That parentification's making a comeback. So another negative outcome would be that internalized gaslighting. That's another thing, which gives the impression that children raised by these kind of parents, they feel invalidated. So therefore, feeling as if they have very little to offer can also result in a form of imposter syndrome. Like, oh, I'll never be enough. I have to also constantly prove myself. And you kind of see this with this character all the time. And we kind of talked a little bit about that, again, with the current mental state of Illumi podcast episode. But now you're seeing where it came from, right? You're seeing the foundation of where those cracks originally came from. So another consequence would be the lack of care for oneself. So when the child is essentially their parent's pawn, the child learns that their goals are not important no more, and that the only goal is to please their parents, to stay in their parents' good graces. And by doing all of that, they might develop anxiety and perfectionism issues from trying to live up to these parents' unrealistic expectations. In this case, mom's unrealistic expectations. And again, we talked about this somewhat before, right? With like Kikyo and where she came from and all this other stuff. And it's like, she's in survival mode. But when you're in survival mode, you are essentially in a defense mechanism. You're in a traumatized state, just like all the time. And when you're in a traumatized state, I'm gonna be real, taking care of your kids are gonna be a little bit hard in a healthy way, right? It's like, you're going to provide the basic needs, sure, but like the emotional needs are basically gone, because at this point, all you're thinking is how to survive. You're not thinking of everything else that is required, which is, again, those emotional, softer tendencies. It's not really there anymore if all you're thinking is how to survive, how to survive, how to survive. Just in survival mode all the time. See, with parenting, in a healthy way, you need a moment, just a moment of relaxation. We'll probably get more into that a little bit later, but keep that in mind. And again, however, with, again, just personality disorders and parenting in general, keyword untreated, is not the only form of parenting that she exemplifies with her children. Let's talk about another one that we see more so consistently as well. See, another form would be helicopter parenting. And helicopter parents are overprotective and obsessed with their children's lives. And funny enough, this form of parenting was on the rise during the 90s especially, right? And that's when this character, at least again with my modern day timeline, would be born, right? So it's on the rise in the 90s with more awareness of child abductions. Because remember, it's not like with the Zoldyck family, we talk about extreme families all the time. In this case, they have some exposure to media, just not everything, right? So there's probably certain music which they cannot listen to, but they watch the news. They're updated on all like recent events. They kind of have to be, right? Considering their job, being involved in like the world of politics and all that. So it's like, it makes sense for them to be at least updated with the news and things like that, right? Maybe be invested in like entertainment news, but probably nothing else around that, right? Like entertainment as a whole, like movies and all this other stuff. There might be a bit things then and there, right? Might have moments of freedom, but not so much to the point where they're absolutely immersed in pop culture. Like they don't know any and everything, but they know like just a little bit. Probably according to the family standards, enough, you know? So again, the rise of child abductions, you'd probably be hearing about that. And as a result, this prompted parents to make sure their children were to never leave their sight, right? And again, with the Zoldyck's case, you have a mixture of just like control and dominion and hierarchies overall. But on top of that, you have Kikyo that is just naturally concerned for her kids. Like a lot of the times, if you really were to just sit down, break it down, and stop coming from this place of like, I'll be honest, misogyny with some of these judgments towards her, and just really sit and think, it'd be like, you know what? I kind of get her worry. I kind of get her anxieties. Like, it's a lot and it is intense and nobody's denying how intense it is. But considering what type of environment she's in, everything is amped up to the 10th fucking degree in that house. Ain't nobody chill in that house. I digress. So anyways, helicopter parents, overprotectiveness, and as a result, never leaving the sight, right? Children never leaving the sight. This unfortunately results in that lack of boundaries for the child though. So helicopter parents are normally compensating for the lack of love or negligence they may have felt as a child. In this case, I'm assuming with Kikyo, she was probably an orphan, right? Again, we talked about some of the effects of poverty, not to a great degree. With the next character analysis, we'll do it in way more depth because, you know, Illumi's fiance was a person that was born from poverty, right? So we'll talk more about that in depth, but essentially the negligence, lack of love, we know that due to both the environment and the lack of parental figures as a whole. So just kind of raising yourself for real. So helicopter parents are normally compensating for that lack of love. So to be like, well, I didn't have this much love when I was a kid, so now I'm going to give my kid all the love. But some people take it to the next extreme, right? That kind of black and white thinking. So it's like, if I don't have enough love, then my kid's just going to have all the love, and it's going to end up being smothering as fuck. And that's the main problem. So the consequences of this form of parenting are also very dire, as you can clearly see. As children who have these kind of parents can develop very unhealthy coping mechanisms, especially when facing defeat or disappointment in life, as well as undeveloped life skills, such as the ability to do chores like laundering of clothes or maintaining a home in general. Now, I think in Kikyo's case, to be fair, certain life skills, I believe at least the first kid has, because again, here's the thing with first kids, right? And I'm speaking somewhat from experience. The first kid, because you're an experiment kid and because you kind of seen your parents during the beginning of their parenthood, they may try to teach you everything. Everything, right? So at first, even though like Kikyo and Illumi, right, just them, because siblings weren't born yet, it's just them, right? It'd be like, you're the only friend that I have. I might as well tell you, some things. You might as well help me with like sewing and cooking and whatnot. It's like, I might as well, bring you along. It's like, we in this adventure together, it's just you and me, best of pals kind of thing, right? It's like in the beginning, you would argue, it's like, oh, things were okay, the abuse is like, not as intense yet, you could say like, oh, it's not that bad. And of course, I'm not blaming any of the siblings for that, because at the end of the day, it's the adult's responsibility to keep that stability in the household. And for whatever reason, it seems to be a generational problem. They want to have multiple kids, but they don't know how to manage multiple children. But you know what? We'll talk more about that when we get into those older family systems. But it's like, y'all want multiple kids, but you don't know how to handle multiple kids. So it's just like, this is what I be saying. It's like, maybe some people are better off with just one kid. I don't know. I feel like let's really sit back and wonder for a minute. It's like, I'm sure the oldest kid loves their siblings. A lot of older children, myself included, I love my siblings down. Would life have been better if I was an only child? I think about it, and I think it would be a lot less stressful for my parents. Probably. But at the same time, I love my siblings to think of life any different. And I mean, it is what it is now. You can't really change the past, so you in this bitch for real. You know what I mean? But yeah, in this case, it's like, it's probably the same thing where it's like, life could probably be way easier. But it's too late now. What you gonna do? So again, continuing on with that conversation, we'll dive more into that later too. But as children who have these kinds of parents and the consequences of it, you can have like unhealthy coping mechanisms. So especially when facing defeat or disappointment, you don't know how to handle that, right? Because again, your parents tried sheltering you from everything. So now it's just like, I'm expected to be perfect. I'm expected to do all these things. I don't even know how to handle defeat or disappointment because I never was able to deal with that in a healthy way, right? So it's just like you have all of that. And on top of that, right, when it comes to not being able to launder clothes or maintain a home, in Illumi's case, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Here's why. Again, I think the mixture of Kikyo's background and just being somewhat okay to like, okay, you could like teach the first kid like any and everything. Like, we don't really care what you do, kind of, sort of. Like, we care. We'll still teach the kid because it's still his older kid, but at the same time, I guess you could implement your parenting. They didn't really have as much control of her parenting back when Illumi was like the only kid. So it was like she was allowed to be a mom with the first kid, at least. When the second kid came about, it was like, I don't know, I guess. And she was still allowed to be somewhat of a mom. It was only when the third, fourth, and fifth kid came in where things started to shift and they started to want more control and being like, she's doing too much. I didn't really like her from the beginning. Let's implement all these new rules in, right? The levels, I think, even though Silva used them, I'm not sure if they've always been there or it's Silva's own invention. If it is Silva's own invention, now I have to guess which kid was the first one to see it. I'm probably going to guess, and this is a surprise twist, maybe the first kid, but when they were a teenager, because y'all know, especially again, taking back into the gender exploration, how some dads be about their first femme children, to be like, Oh, it's a lot. It's too much. We gotta do all this shit. It's like, nigga, you're doing too much. Stop it. So I'm saying this, like, for now, right, at least on Kikyo's end, and be like, oh, you know, that just sounds like my strict mama. Shit ain't too bad yet. Yeah. Not yet. Cause really, I don't excuse a lot what Kikyo does, right? But at the same time, you understand where she's coming from. Somewhat. But there's a lot of stuff that's inexcusable too, and I ain't gonna justify everything, right? And here's the kicker of it, right? It has good intentions. It really does. I mean, it's natural for parents to want the best for their children, but I'm not going to justify it. You are really out here kind of hindering your children's growth for real, even if that's not your intention. So Kikyo's parenting style, unfortunately, here's the part where I'm never going to condone. I don't think this shit's okay at all, right? Here's the judgment starting to come in. We are getting introduced to the abuse aspect. So into the picture by allowing both physical and emotional abuse. So here's the enabling part where it's just like, I can't condone that. You're out here enabling this kind of behavior. Child physical abuse is defined as the intentional harming of a child, as we know, through bruising or more severe injuries. So when recognizing this kind of abuse, intentions matter because it implies that the abuser intended harm as a form of punishment. So for example, dipping a child's hand in boiling water for stealing would probably be a good example of pretty physical abuse. It's pretty of a visceral image. So in like Kikyo's case, it's hinted in all of the series that Kikyo uses whipping with horsewhips as one form of a punishment. We saw this before. So the cause of such behavior could be now maternal stress and anxiety. Again, a mixture of just being within that household, which could come from a lack of support from other family members, the lack of information she received, and her lack of involvement in the household decisions demonstrates this. So, along with so many other factors, which again, we'll talk about in more detail later, that kind of has her involvement within these punishments. And again, to keep everybody in line and to keep everybody in the box that they're supposed to be in. Because if you're outside the box, then this family's not going to run. And we see that now with like everybody kind of being out the box and things are just starting to crumble because everybody's out the box. Even though you can't keep people in boxes. That was an unstable system from the start. That's your problem. And I like to take this back, and we're going to talk about this more with the Zoldyck Family System podcast episodes because there's going to be multiple. But, you know, for example, with like Victoria's Secret, right? The thing about Victoria's Secret and why the business doesn't last anymore, people be blaming this, that, and the third. And it's like, it's none of that. It's because they weren't able to adapt. They weren't able to progress, and they weren't able to make things better business-wise. They wanted to keep shit the same all the fucking time. If you keep shit the same all the fucking time, eventually it's going to crumble because that's just not how life is. Why do you think evolution's a thing? Nature is always adapting. It's always changing. You can't change nature, baby, to stay the same. Shit's gotta change whether you like it or not. And that's kind of the main issue that not just me, but I feel like with just this family in general, it's like, they don't like to change. It's like, oh, well, it's tradition. We always done shit this way. Just because you always done shit this way don't mean it's always the right way. Sometimes you gotta change shit. But we'll talk more about that later. Point is, lack of involvement. There's an example of this. So, for example, in Hunter x Hunter chapter 42, she specifically says, bother, bother, bother. No one ever asked me first, right? So again, I said this before and I'll say it again. She's not really considered for decision making. It's like, that's not her job as the quote unquote wife. It's like, you don't make decisions here. You make babies and you stay in your fucking place. Very patriarchal in this household. There's some like nuances. There's some like, we don't really care about y'all's gender presentations, but in a way we kind of do. It's a weird mix. It's strange. It really is strange. It's like, it's a weird clusterfuck. It's like, how? It's like, I don't know, only a way that you can say on some Zoldyck shit. Sometimes that's the only way to explain this family. On some Zoldyck shit. Ain't no other explanation. Anyways, Emotional abuse is defined, and that's another kind of abuse that we see that she uses, is defined as using strong emotions or manipulative tactics to control the minds of another person. So the goal of emotional abuse is to silence and isolate the victim in order for them to do their will. So you creating chaos in the home, you're using emotional blackmail, control, isolation. There are all signs of emotional abuse. You have gaslighting. It's one of the most common types. You heard of the term gaslighting before, that she may use. An abuser will fabricate a false narrative in order to make their victims question their judgment and reality. They do this all the time. So Kekio says that in the Zoldyck musical, which is another reference we're going to make today, that she puts poison in the apple pie. So that implies she poisons her children to disassociate in their house. So it makes all the murderous shit appear normal. It's like everything that's going on is fine. It's fine. It's the physical form of all of that. Here's the shit that's sweet. You taste it and be like something weird with it. No, it's not. It's sweet. Keep eating it. Even though you know deep inside something's wrong. Kikyo's parenting style is reminiscent of other figures in fiction, such as Mother Gothel from the Disney movie Tangled, and Odelia Blight from Disney's television Owl House. There's also plenty of other examples as well, right, from different medias, but those are the main two that you can reference to. There's many others, though. And right next to it, we're going to get into Silva's parenting style right about now. And then after that, we're going to take a break and we're going to dive into early neurodivergency. So we talked about neurodivergency before as an adult. So now we're going to talk about how that affects this character within childhood. But right now, let's talk about Silva's parenting style real quick. So Silva, I already ranted about this man. So I guess I'm going to get angry again today. Because why the fuck not? Y'all love me best when I'm angry. Let me get ready. So Silva, right, is the current Zoldyck family's father, as well as the current Zoldyck business leader. Let me start nice, right? Let me start cute. Zeno, his father assigned him the responsibility of overseeing all the aspects of the assassin business. Now, to be fair, it can be difficult to separate familiar relationships from more business-like interactions when his employees are his family. So I'll give him that. A lot of the times, and you see this all the time in real life, shit can be hard. Real hard. There appears to be no true separation, though, between work and family. And his interactions with his children come across as cold at best and exploitative at worst. I think the most recent example of this that we see within fiction would be with the show Succession, right? With the dad on Succession. You see this shit too? Yeah. And again, it happens in real life all the time as well, where you have like these people that are having a hard time to separate family, business, and not having the two canoodle all the time. So, cold at best, exploitative at worst. We're going to talk about that. Some might dispute that. Some might say, well, considering how his conversations with Killer were in that one episode, episode 24, it gave the impression of a loving and compassionate father. Already told you that was a fucking mask. Why are y'all like this? Always believing in a mask. Always believing in people's lies. I digress. So in the episode, he appears to understand Killer's feelings, quote unquote, about meeting his friends and the date in the Hunter exam. All of this, again, is a fucking ruse. It is a scam. It is a scam. So when he speaks to his wife, all the truth comes out. His emotions become harsher, revealing his true intentions. We see that shit, the mask falls off. His compassion, in quotations, was most likely a ruse to gain the trust of his children so they would do his bidding. And you're asking, why the fuck would he do that? Because again, unfortunately in this case, now we're talking about NPD. Now we're talking about narcissism. See how everything comes full circle? Unfortunately, especially if it's untreated, that's what they tend to do. Keyword untreated. If you have this disorder and you're generally trying to do better, not talking about you, Keep living your life. Keep living beautifully. I'm talking about the fuckers who not only have it untreated, but now they're going a step further and weaponizing their disorder. That I cannot stand. I cannot stand that shit. Oh, I'm getting heated already. Let me calm down. Which happens to be assassinations. Again, everybody fits in this perfect little hierarchy, fits in the box. You gotta do what I say. You do what I do. At what point do you have to say it's beyond family tradition? At this point, nigga, it's just you. Okay? I don't even think back then they did shit like this. You just making up new shit. For you. For kicks and fun. I'm getting angry. Calm down, me. So one example was when Silva said disrespectfully to his wife, then stop your griping and keep your mouth shut. Where's my gun? I'll shoot a man. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that. I don't care. Following this, he says, don't worry, he'll come back home one day, delusional. Which is followed by an evil chuckle. He's delusional. He is a delusional man. Listen, demonstrating that he cares about Killua's feelings. No, he does not. He cares about his own feelings. He cares about Killua, again, being that positive projection to appease his own feelings. Do you say the shit? As long as he follows the path he's chosen for him, as long as that kid does whatever he says, follows the path he wants him to do. Again, the lack of choice. This begs the question, however, of how he's managed to keep the first kid under his box for so long, under that dysfunctional role that we've discussed earlier. The first approach would be to give the child a role. Without even realizing it, the child is given adult responsibilities. Again, back to that parentification. Back to that parentification. Illumi was specifically assigned the role of caretaker. So, as proven by the statement that Illumi says, which would be, the job Dad and I trained you to do. And I talked about, that's a weird as fuck sentence. That's a weird statement. Silva delegated the responsibility of raising Killua and his other younger siblings to the oldest, on purpose, treating him like a third parent. Really sit back and wonder, what kind of sense does that make? And again, a lot of families do this, but each and every family has a different reason, and we talked about the different reasons with the parentification episode. But in this case, didn't have to do that. You have the privilege to not do that. Y'all got more than enough money for that to not happen. So that just goes to show you, he did that shit on purpose. He did it for the kicks. He did it for the kicks. Considering that this officially started when Illumi was at the tender age of around 12. It's when all the bullshit happened. Like I told you, double digits is when the shit starts happening. This could have some negative effects on his development. Because we talked about this with parentification. It's not normal. It's not. So to be a caretaker within a dysfunctional family normally means the enabler or the martyr of the family. So that's some additional stuff you need to know. So this person would attempt to keep everybody within the family happy. Again, tornado on fire. You have to bring the water, the pressurized water, to make sure the tornado is no longer on fire. There's still a tornado, but it can't be on fire. God forbid it ends up on fire. Even if it means being delusional about the real issues within the family. It'd be like, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. No, it's not. But you can't say no, it's not, because now everything is on you. If your ass saying shit's not fine, everybody else saying shit's not fine, and now the tornado's on fire again. So this person would pick up the pieces in order to prevent a meltdown, right? Or a rock bottom experience. And while this gives the family a temporary balance, a temporary relief, eventually this prevents the family from actually healing and moving on. They're always out here fixing it. And again, I was in the same shoes, right? Always fixing, until eventually you have to realize, this ain't my problem. I didn't start this shit. I'm out here fixing somebody else's mess. Fuck am I doing? You gotta sit down and realize, I gotta live my own life. I can't keep doing this. You can't keep doing it. So this responsibility of caretaker would normally be given to a parentified child. So some negative aspects that caretaker may develop would include the following. And I just want to make this disclaimer, right? Because this is not me suddenly, the oldest kid, in this case, Illumi, right, stops being an older sibling. You don't ever stop being an older sibling. You care for your younger siblings. And I think a good example of this would be like Lilo and Stitch, right, for example. Because with Lilo and Stitch, by the time it got to the end, now what do they have to learn how to do? They have to learn how to adjust as siblings. See, Nami, for the longest time, had an imbalanced relationship with Lilo. Because for the longest time, she had to be considered kind of a parent before she was a sister. And because of that, Lilo says, I don't want that. I want a sister. I see you as my sister, but she can't have that. In her case with the caretaking, right? It was completely out of circumstance. It was accidental parentification. We talked about this before, right? Intentional and accidental. In her case, it was accidental because their parents died. There's nobody else to take care of Miss Thing. And because she didn't have any help, because now she has help, right? By the end of the movie, she has help now. She has a community. She got her man helping, you know. But before that, she was on her own. And because of that, she had a hard time connecting with her siblings in a sibling kind of way. Because all they saw her as was like a weird conglomeration of a sibling that was in a parent's place. And that's weird as fuck to a kid. Kids aren't that stupid. They know something's off. Like, this is weird. But there ain't nothing that you can do about that. And in this case, still ain't nothing that you can do about that, because it's the adults in your life that's supposed to build a stable foundation. It didn't. Now everything's out of whack. Now there's role reversals. You out here doing the job that an adult's supposed to do. And now we confused. We confused out here. So anyways, let's talk about the problems that we already talked about before. Let's talk about it again, right? Some of the issues that come with that parentification, that caretaker role: codependency, anxiety, depression, and choosing partners with severe needs, such as those with mental illnesses or addictions. Not to be fair, even though I did talk about the positives of Hizulu, aka Ahsoka and Illumi's relationship, I'll probably dive more so into the negatives later on too. And I probably did talk about the negatives already, just not in depth. And I probably would do it more so when I get to Hisoka's analysis, right? Because we're going to get into like the mental illness aspect, meaning the ASPD with this man. Next man we'll talk about, right? And ADHD, along with probably a couple other things. Depression, kind of, because depression, it tends to show a bit differently for men. We'll talk about it. And addictive tendencies, we'll talk all about that. But now I'm not saying like if you choose a person and they just so happen to have a mental illness that means you're screwed. Like, everybody's got issues. All right, calm down, relax. That doesn't mean like you're a horrible person or your partner's a horrible person. It's like, as long as you dealing with your shit, you good. Relax. When they mean choosing people with severe needs, that means you feel needed, right? You feel like, oh, this person can't live without me. I have to take care of them. You know, like, that's what they mean, right? They don't mean like two adults that function that just so happen to have mental illnesses. They mean like they're incapable of taking care of themselves, which we know is not really true in this case, luckily. So I guess let's continue on, right? So a caregiver typically acts in the constant fear that their family's gonna fall apart. They leave them unsafe, alone, unlovable, rejected, right? And so on. So by taking action to keep the family together, this is bringing back sad memories for me too. They are depriving both the family and themselves of the opportunity to deal with the issue. So eventually you, as a caretaker, right? A caregiver, caretaker, you have to let shit go sometimes. Still care for your family, But some things you gotta let go because it ain't your fault. Some of these issues be lasting longer than you. And it's like, yeah, there ain't nothing I can do about this. The fuck? A lot of these issues be lasting longer than you. So it's like, ain't nothing I could do. Ain't nothing you could do. So again, within the family system, Illumi is shown to have kind of a give and take relationship with his father. Now, a give and take normally requires one or both people to compromise and cooperate. So like I said before, circle, line, when we talked about the relationship analysis that I had for his romantic relationship, right, with his fiancée. We talked about circle versus line. In this case, the relationship we have with his father, which is not supposed to happen, line. It's supposed to be a circle. Well, why is there a line there? Why is there a line? It's supposed to be a circle. So, however, this could be another facade. The illusion of choice. So now you have the illusion of choice. Silva can make it appear that his ideas are actually his children's ideas, and that he must already be of sound mind. Like, shit must be genius. There ain't nothing wrong, even though there's a lot wrong. Huh? A lot wrong. We talked about this. So it must be an idea of sound mind, right? That's the idea. It's like, well, we already talked about it, so I guess it's okay. However, we are now aware that Silva is prone to lying a fucking lot and making decisions without considering how they affect others. He don't care. And that's probably the saddest part about all of this, right? It's when you realize, sure, when you're younger and at first when your child's a baby, you'd be like, oh, everything's gonna be great, everything's gonna be fine, da-da-da. But now, the older you get, the more you realize some people, they're a little too selfish to be having children right now, right? And that's something you have to realize with Silva. It's kind of a dark pill to swallow. It's kind of one I don't even want to swallow, right? But it's like, I hate this man, but even I don't like admitting the fact that he's too selfish to have kids. But it's true. That's like everything is for him, him, him. You don't need to be having kids until, and here's the thing I would say for everybody. Having kids is selfless. It's selfish, but also selfless, right? The act in itself, you're bringing somebody into the world without their consent, all that, yada, 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 selfish. That's fair. That we could agree with. The selfless part is raising the kid. And some of y'all are not willing to take the transition into the selflessness. Y'all like the selfish act of bringing somebody into this world. You don't like the selfless act of raising somebody. And I feel like that's my main problem with Silva, because it's like selfish enough to bring these kids into the world, not selfless enough to raise them. Damn, realization of the fucking year. Even I had to make it. It's crazy. But anyways, this man is prone to lying, making decisions without considering how they affect others. So this destructive parenting approach, known as parenting by lying, quite fucking obviously, involves lying to kids in order to control their emotions and behavior. So children who grow up in this kind of environment, they tend to develop antisocial personality problems. They might not develop the disorder itself, but they have some of those tendencies. See, I don't like using the term psychopath or whatever. First of all, it's not correct to be using those terms like that. I can't even say they're colloquial. They barely get used nowadays for good reason. But I don't like using those terms. Some people use those terms for this character, and that's not necessarily correct. See, you end up developing some of those traits, but normally when you end up developing some of those traits, it's for survival reasons. Because you can't even trust your own person that's supposedly supposed to take care of you. This guardian is supposed to take care of you. So I can't even trust you. So I have to develop these skills to protect myself. So now I look fucking weird because you were a weirdo all these years. You look strange. Now I have to be strange to match your strangeness. I'm already getting heated. Damn. Not to mention, he also shows signs of being an authoritarian. Now, there's a difference between authoritative and authoritarian. Authoritative, it means you have some discipline, but at the same time, your kids are still your kids. You still have kindness. You still have your kids, interact with the world and have interdependence and all that. That's the healthy form. Authoritative is healthy. You want some form of discipline while at the same time have your kids explore and be their own person. Authoritarian means your parents get all the control and you, the child, gets none. There's no way of you exploring yourself as a human being. There's no way of you interacting with the world in a healthy way. Everything, parent dominion. And narcissistic parent. He's that too. Of course, they're going to mix together because that's normally what happens, sadly. So an authoritative parent has high demands and low responsiveness. So again, high demands, low responsiveness. We talked about it. Interacting with the world in a healthy way, but at the same time, you have these demands, being like, all right, you got to do this, that, and the third. It's like, listen, you can't be out here doing anything you want. There will be some consequences to some of your actions depending on what you do. Normal parenting, aka authoritarian parenting, however, is characterized by high expectations and very low responsiveness. What do I mean by that? Well, the authoritarian parent has high expectations for their children and has provided very little in the way of feedback and nurturing. So I should say authoritarian probably have more middle responsiveness versus authoritarian has high and very low. So authoritarian, high expectations for their parents, provide little for their children, probably parents too, depending on who you're dealing with. Nasty word. But provide little in the way of feedback and nurturing. So mistakes are frequently punished harshly. And we see this all the time with this household, right? So when feedback is given, it's frequently negative. There's not a positive ounce of feedback in sight. Have you ever complimented your children? No. Probably not, or not often. It's I probably remember one time when my father said something good to me. That's not good. Anyways, continuing on, the authoritarian style, which includes yelling, corporal punishment, this we know for a fact is within that house for damn sure. So authoritarian parents often focus on an adherence to authority. Again, hierarchies. Their favorite thing. Love that shit, even though realistically, right? Even if naturally, there will be some form of a hierarchy within a family. It's not supposed to be so heavily enforced. It's well, calm down on that shit, right? Clearly, there's no such thing as calming down on that shit. Adherence to authority. Bam! You do this, that, and the fucking third. It's these are your kids. This ain't the military. And even with the military, you know what? Different conversation, different day about the military-industrial complex. That's a whole different conversation. And instead, rewarding positive behavior. So let's continue on, right? And instead of rewarding that positive behavior, now a child only provides feedback for negative behavior in the form of punishment. So parents with this style, they tend to show little warmth and nurturing traits. This we know for a fact. Few choices for children. We know that for a fact. And mistrusting their own kids. We know that for a fact. Literally checks all the fucking boxes. It's crazy. So we see more of his authoritarian methods in episode 140 and 141. With the handling of Alika and the levels that are placed for handling internal family issues, which are heavy restrictions, as we see, we learned earlier on. So the narcissistic family parenting traits, I should say, that he shows are primarily failing to emotionally nurture his kids, displaying sudden mood changes, and using his children to attain personal gain. He does all of that shit and then some. So some negative aspects of authoritarian parenting would include, but are not limited to, associating obedience with success and love, displaying more aggressive behaviors towards others, having a lower self-esteem, conforms easily, and experience anxiety and depression always. And these are some of the negative effects that authoritarian parenting would have. And we kind of see this with this first kid, right? So associating obedience, success with love. We unfortunately see that there's clues, there's signs, there's sayings that, Illumi says all the time where it's like, yeah, there we go. So displaying more aggressive behavior towards others. We literally see this, especially during the Hunter exam, where it's like, oh, snappiness. What for? Now we know what for. Now I'm putting the bricks down. Now we know what for. So having lower self-esteem and conforms easily and experience anxiety and depression. So we talked about it multitudes of times and we see the effects of that. So Silva's authority over his children have been described as cult-like. So his tactics for keeping his children loyal are similar to those used by cult leaders too. So he's on that shit, he's on that timing to control their followers. Some of the tactics he has most likely uses a lack of boundaries and assumptions that only parents are qualified to make decisions about their children. Again, we talked about this and why I compare like fundamentalist families to theirs is because of this commonality. So in a mesh relationship, and we're talking more about that now, is characterized by a shared assumption amongst the members that one is incapable of making independent decisions. Right? So it's like, y'all can't live without me. I make all the rules. I'm the big man of the house, right? That's the mentality. So along with the lack of trust in the outside world caused by isolating his children, he fears the outside world will provide information to the family members he wishes to control, and therefore it causes them to rebel. Do you catch me? Do you feel me? All right, you feeling me? And that kind of goes for the end of the parenting styles. In the next section, we're going to discuss even deeper about the scars of physical abuse and how that affects Illumi, especially back then when he was a child. We're going to take another break and I'll catch y'all in a minute. Hello everybody, welcome back. I know that was a very long section. Let's dive right into this next section, which talks all about the scars of physical abuse for this specific character. So the influence of Illumi's parenting on him may have a significant impact on his development, and as an adult, it just has that great effect for him. So from his father's strict authoritarian parenting to his mother's suffocating coddling, this could be stifling to one's own development. It is just one of many factors that contributes to the person that we see today. But what else could it be? What else could have gone wrong? See, humans, after all, are very complex beings with many different parts, and as previously stated, there have been indications of physical abuse within the Zoldyck household. I don't think that's any surprise there. So physical abuse is another detriment to a child's development. So following that, we are going to investigate the negative impacts that physical abuse may have had on Illumi. Let's go. What even is physical abuse? So physical abuse is defined as any non-accidental act that causes physical harm to a child. Excessive corporal punishment or unjustifiable punishment is frequently represented by physical injury. This usually happens when a person is frustrated or angry and strikes, shakes, or throws a child. Any intentional assault on a child, such as burning, biting, cutting, poking, twisting limbs, or torturing them in any other way, constitutes as physical abuse. The Zoldicks probably do all that shit and then some. So there are some physical indicators of physical abuse to look out for. Bruises on the buttocks, back, and face in particular. Abrasions, specifically under the lips, tongue, or torn frenulum, which is a small piece of tissue that connects the gum to the lip. So, in other words, that small piece that's on the very top, right? Upper lip, like right up here, and you have like the in-between, that's the frenulum. So, whipping lacerations that resemble a C or U shape, as well as other wounds. Internal injuries to the liver, spleen, pancreas, kidneys, or other vital organs. Internal injuries may cause dissensions of the abdomen, blood in the urine, vomiting, and abdominal pain. Fractures, particularly of the back ribs. So these fractures can cause by either blunt force, hit, or compression, squeeze. So compression, which is why I said before, why didn't flinch at like Gon's reactions, because used to it. It's probably something that this character, and honestly all these older kids you could say, is probably used to. So in Hunter x Hunter, chapter 37, right? Let's get into what I just talked about. Gon compressed Illumi's arm to the point of breaking, and Illumi had almost no reaction other than slight irritation, most likely as a result of being numb to the pain associated with fractures or broken bones. So some behavioral indicators of physical abuse to look out for is being wary of other adults. I'm saying other adults now, but like of just adults in general back when he was a kid, of a particular individual, is violent to animals or other kids, may be incredibly hostile or incredibly reclusive, can't remember how the injuries happened, or give contradictory explanations, and dissociation. And this is why I always go to show you, right? Like the reactions that people expect victims to have versus what they actually have. It'd be like, oh, that's really visceral. Yeah, I don't think people react to abuse in like a, oh, woe is me kind of way. Like, I don't know who the fuck created that lie. I don't want to say it's 100% a lie, but even like the freeze or fawn response, which I guess you could describe it that way, but it's not even that way. It's also a lot more visceral than people give credit for. Like, this shit is dark. This is abuse we're talking about. Oh, anyways, let's continue on. Attacking bystanders is a common manifestation of aggression within Illumi. Some may argue that the threat to Gon was an act of aggression, but it could also be a reasonable reaction for being harmed by Gon in the first place, right? So you can have that kind of double-edged sword of, well, on one hand, it is an act of aggression, but at the same time, if some little kid just went up and broke my arm too, I'd be pissed off. I'd be angry as fuck and probably wishing them death too. And I'm not gonna lie to you. It's like, what do you mean? As indicated by the line, that makes him quite dangerous to me. I like to deal with that. And it's like, sitting back and thinking about it, I would too. Obviously not in that way. I'll probably react differently, but it's like, I get it. It's probably internal thoughts. I would never say that shit out loud, but it's like you're thinking it. You're thinking, yeah, this kid's wild. Where they mama at? Somebody don't handle them, I will. You would never do it, but you thought about it. It's like, we ain't perfect. We thought about some shit before. Crazy shit. So it's also possible that the Zoldyck children received, I'm saying possible, it did happen. Possible, like we didn't see the evidence for it before. Electrocution training. So as a result, an electric shock is unavoidable. Some of the consequences of electric shock include the following. You got problems with your eyes, specifically the rapid development of cataracts. So in other words, high chance of ending up blind as shit. Someone needs to tell Kill that. Whoops. It's not his fault. Again, blame his parents. I'm so sorry. Damn. See, when you go through it, when you really be out here studying this shit, it'd be like, I'm gonna need a minute. Anyways, continuing on. Muscle pain and spasms. Ringing in the ears, migraines. It's also important to note that the injuries from electric shock are not curable. So, it's chronic pain now. Yay! You will potentially deal with this shit for the rest of your life. That's what you want. No. Alright. So before we continue, some may wonder, well, why doesn't, in this case, this is a lot of victim blaming bullshit that I don't like, right? So here it comes. It'd be like, well, why doesn't we just leave or run away? That victim blaming bullshit. And again, everybody falls into that trap. They all fall into that trap. But I'm just here to tell you, aside from the severe restrictions discussed previously, and I'm going to add on top of that something I didn't add in here, but I will add now, right? The power and control that this family has, because we're talking about an ultra wealthy family. And I guess we're literally having that conversation now with like, for Cassie and Diddy, right? You have some people saying the same bullshit. It's like, oh, why didn't she just run away? But we saw her try to run away and look what happened, right? We saw like, oh, even if she tried to run away and she somehow quote unquote escaped, she can't really escape because now this man has all the power and control of the music industry. Now all eyes are going to go back to her. She's a walking target. You see how dangerous this shit is? This ain't no game. Yes, you can escape eventually, and I hope the best for every abuse victim journey of escape, but I just need people to know that it's not going to be an easy journey. Especially when that person has power. When the system that you're running away from has power. We see this all the time, not just with Cassie and Diddy. Another good example is with Scientology. People escaping that and telling their story and how there's like, oh, you gotta cut them off. You gotta do all these other kinds of punishments, this, that, and the third. Like, it's a risky line to make when you decide to leave. It's not just get up, leave, your life is suddenly better. That's not what the fuck happens when it comes to abuse. I take this shit seriously, man. I do. Shit's sad. It's more than just sad. I'm saying basic words, but there's I don't think there's a word for me to describe how I feel about this particular situation. Just with abuse in general, it makes me sick. You know, abuse does make me sick. I think especially systematic abuse, it probably makes me... Let's keep going, okay? I never went through it, luckily, but I know friends who did. Shit will break your heart, break your spirit, scare the fuck out of you. Let's keep going. I'm probably gonna start crying. I didn't think I would again, but this is a very sensitive topic, so curse me my empathy, right? All right. And again, we live in a victim-blaming culture, so it's not like I'm blaming nobody, because everybody at some point in time probably had this toxic mentality until you learn that abuse is a lot more nuanced and complicated. And shit really is ultimately heartbreaking. And there may have been some things that your abuse victim has done to which it's like, that's just questionable, I don't know. But nobody deserves to be treated like that. Nobody. So it's also important to know, also, again, on top of that, when it's your own family, when it's like, I still love this person, this is my family, they're supposed to love me. It's like, yes, they're supposed to. You're not wrong for feeling that way. But either they don't do it in a healthy way, they don't love you at all. That's a sick realization for somebody to make. And that takes time for them to have the reality set in and kick in and be like, the person that's supposed to love me, my own family member that's supposed to love me, does not, or does not do it in a right way. And I have to make the heartbreaking decision to leave? Give people the grace and time. And not everybody's going to escape in a, stereotypical da-da-da-da-da. It's like, this shit ain't no fucking Mission Impossible. Like, all shit aside, right? Like, yes, we're talking about the assassin family. We're talking about all this other stuff. And it's like, yes, a lot of the missions they are Mission Impossible type shit. But this is one of those things where it's like, it affects real life people too. And sometimes you can't Mission Impossible your way out of abuse. Sometimes you gotta do it the unconventional way. So yeah. No victim blaming bullshit. I'm sick of it. And this happens a lot of the times, not just again with this conversation about this character, but I see it a lot with just conversations about abuse in general. Shit makes me mad as fuck sometimes. Let's continue on to the next section right about now, which is growing up with a cold spoon. Now we got to switch around a little bit, right? Now we're talking about affluence, talking about wealth. So one must think that living in such an opulent surroundings would be absolutely no problems. And we already talked about how that's not necessarily true. Despite this, Illumi may have had some issues as a result of growing up in a wealthy environment. Growing up wealthy comes with severe mental issues and a lack of adjustment to the world around you. It does. Let me explain how and why, right before y'all come to me. Evidently, happiness isn't something that money can truly buy. And I know it's so stereotypical to say, yes, money does make life easier. To say that it doesn't is also insane. But can it buy happiness? Fuck no. At least not the kind that you need. Maybe the kind that you want. Maybe the temporary kind. But it ain't the kind you need. So on one hand, children raised in affluent households are 20 to 30% more likely to develop anxiety than their less affluent peers. I did not know that. At least I didn't until I talked to my mom, who did grow up in that kind of background. I'm not going to give lore about my own parents, at least deeply, but I say this from someone who heard from another person's experience. So affluent children are also more likely to engage in riskier behaviors, such as early sexual encounters with no protective practices, aggressiveness, and heavy substance use. So in addition, as a result of parental pressures and higher expectations, children from wealthier families develop chronic depression and low self-esteem, particularly in dynastic families, which of course we talked about all those issues before, and it will be amplified within these dynastic families specifically, dynastic families, which is the ones that we are discussing right about now. So wealthy children are also more likely to develop narcissistic traits. They might not have NPD, but again, similar to what I said about some of those antisocial traits for survival, narcissistic traits for survival, due to their parents instilling behavior that prioritizes self over others. 'Tis the ways of capitalism. We'll discuss that more later. For instance, researchers conducted an experiment with two people playing the board game Monopoly, in which one player begins the game with a more fictitious money than the other. So the player with the more money initially expressed dissatisfaction, right? They weren't happy with the unequal distribution of the game rules, but this gradually faded as the game progressed. The more fake wealth the player accumulated, the more aggressive he became towards the other player. The more greedy, making fun of him, showing off his wealth, which had been distributed unequally in the first place. So this experiment provides support for the social class essentialism theory. Social class essentialism refers to a person's fervent belief they belong in a particular social class because they thought they possessed essential characters that makes them unique and deserving. That kind of elitism, right? We see this with the Zoldyck family especially, like some of those like elitist traits. Social class essentialism. That's what it boils down to. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about Zoldyck family systems, right? I've been reading The Theory of the Leisure Class, and it's got a lot of interesting takes about the wealthy, may I just say. And about like wealth divisions as a whole. Last but not least, children raised in extremely wealthy households are more likely to have high insecurities as a result of their parents' conditional love. Their parents are more interested in what they can do for them rather than who they are as people. So, how did Illumi depict these specific characteristics that I described later in life? The Hunter x Hunter election arc probably depicts the majority of the negative traits of wealthy children the best that this character tends to possess. So let's go toe for toe. So for example, 322, Illumi chooses a butler to put his sister Alika to test, right, the experiment. So Illumi eventually showed a lack of concern for what occurred to the butler during that time. You are a lower class than me. I don't really care what happens to you. That's the mentality. The Zoldyck mentality. The mentality of the wealthy in general. So finally, it was just a means to an end. So this demonstrates the strict self-preservation rules that Illumi's character may have been instilled with. So another example can be found in 326, where Illumi incites a fight with his brother and causes a car accident while plotting to murder his sister Alika. Aggression lack of empathy, recklessness characterized by this behavior. So another example, during the Hunter exam, when Illumi mocks the idea of killing his brother's best friend, despite the fact it was a joke, such a joke demonstrates a lack of empathy, because he doesn't care how others react to such a suggestion. Growing up silver-spooned in general is a recipe for disaster, and people don't really know that, right? It's like wealth seems so promising, but once you realize, again, the system of capitalism at hand, there's one thing that even I realize. I don't want to be at the top. The top seems scary, not just because it's lonely, but because in order to get there, you have to have so much blood on your hands. So this is especially true if the child was not raised with healthy boundaries, empathetic parents, or family bonding. Because again, you can be wealthy and be a good person. It's just truly a test that I feel like only God can give you. It's not easy. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye to heaven, the eye of needle to heaven, than it will be for a rich man. There's more than one reasons why that Pacific philosophical statement is true. So without these fundamentals in the early years, wealthy children are more likely to develop into people who act impulsively and egotistically to cover up their problems. Because your wealth covers up all. There are no boundaries. Which can be one of the attributing factors to Illumi's issues later in life. So even though I said there might not be as much of these tendencies for these characters, it still exists, and I'm not going to condone it. Again, similar to what I said about Kikyo, there's certain things I'm not going to condone. This is definitely one of them. Is it going to be as intense as other rich kids? No. And I think, again, it's because of that nuance of coming from a mom of poverty and kind of understanding where she comes from. Right? So it's not so elitist to the point where it's like, oh, I only like hang out with, old money rich people. Like, if you're broke, if you're poor. I don't really if you come from a poor background, I'm like, hell, I don't know if this character maybe explored the outside world enough and bumped into someone who might just be like, I'm middle class, I'm from a completely different class. They'd be like, I don't particularly care. I'm still here. I still care. So it's like, obviously the elitism is not as intense, maybe versus the other family members, like the elders of the house, right? So it's like, maybe not as intense, but there's some things that were still there. So there's some factors that are still there, but probably not as intense. It's not as bad. But it's like the issues are there. It's just, somewhat. So in the next section, which will be the very last section again, we're going to talk about growing up with childhood autism, particularly for this character, right? Kind of growing up on how to navigate that unaccommodated, because again, I don't think this house is really that neurodivergent friendly. I mean, and this is not giving any empathy to Silva per se, but to be fair, a lot of the times, if somebody is neurodivergent and has a personality disorder, it's due to the lack of accommodations and just kind of masking to an extreme point, right? So extreme to the point that you end up developing a disorder. So, again, not to be nice, just stating the facts that can absolutely happen. Now, for this character, do I think that's necessarily the case? Not necessarily to the point of developing a personality disorder. Again, I think it just ended up developing to see PTSD, which is also a sad possibility. Regardless, it's a disorder is a disorder. What you gonna do? So again, we're gonna talk about all of that and then some, but give yourself a break, give yourself a minute, and then we'll come back right in and talk all about it. Welcome back, everyone, to the very last section, which is, of course, growing up with childhood autism for this particular character. Let's dive right in. So Illumi can be read as a character who has autism. right? And we talked about this before with the adult version. So as a result, certain aspects of his childhood may have differed from that of a neurotypical child. So now we're going to look into how Louis navigated the Zoldyck environment as someone with this particular neurodivergency in this section. First of all, what is autism? We got to define it again. Autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD, is a developmental condition caused by the difference in the brain. So, it's neurological. Some people have it as a genetic condition, others' causes are unknown. So, because other causes are unknown, we're just going to keep it genetic. 9 times out of 10, genetics. People with ASD may behave, communicate, interact, and learn in different ways that are different from neurotypical people. The abilities of people with ASD can vary. That's why it's called a spectrum. So for example, some people with ASD may have advanced conversational skills, being hyperverbal, while others may be nonverbal. Also, some people may need extra support, high support needs, while others can live without additional support, low support. Also known as the levels. So there should be around level 1, 2, 3. I think there's 3 levels that you would go by. Level 1 being the lowest, low support needs. Level 3 being the highest, meaning you need the most accommodations. So, autism signs and symptoms. ASD appears before the age of 3 and can last for the rest of a person's life. So it's chronic. It can, however, improve over time. So again, chronic means it's not going to go away. And again, this is literally a different wiring of the brain. This is just how your brain is. But you can better accommodate for it throughout later in your years. So some children exhibit symptoms within the first 12 months of life, while others may exhibit symptoms at 24 months or later in life. It really depends. Some people, they don't find out until way later, especially, and we'll talk about this, if you are someone who's a female at birth, you're going to have those difficulties because they didn't study the female body. Sexism within science. You gotta love it. The symptoms and signs that ensue are associated with kids with autism include the following. Though they don't have to have like all of it, but these are the basic ones. So avoid or does not keep eye contact. So it does not respond to name at 9 months. Repeats words or phrases over and over again, also known as echolalia. Gets upset over minor changes and has obsessive interest. Hyperfixations. You get the gist. Autism in girls. So, I'm saying in girls, but this goes for anybody who's a female at birth. I'm just using the binary term. Don't mind that. So given that Illumi is a female at birth, or at least that's the theory that I have, if you have a different one, honestly, I would be more than happy to see it. But it's like, this is my theory. Get off. Hop off if you're going to be sensitive about it, you know? Relax. Given that Illumi is a female at birth, using my theory, it's important to investigate how autism affects girls, or again, anybody underneath this category of someone who's a female at birth in general. It's important to note that girls, or again, femme individuals with ASD are diagnosed later than boys, or anybody who's a male at birth, because ASD research has primarily been focused on boys. And of course that male at birth has its nuance, because with trans girls, things get a whole lot different. And that's kind of the beautiful part about humanity, is that there's all kinds of nuances. You never know. But we're talking a male at birth and they still present masculine to that day is typically what we're referring to. Anybody who socialized a bit different from that, it's going to have different results. So, furthermore, girls with ASD, or again, anybody else that would fit in a similar category, uses the same areas of the brain as boys without ASD. So there's similarities of that. So girls tend to be a lot better at masking or mimicking the behaviors of autistic people. So some signs of autism would be including the following. You got hyperfixations, hypersensitivities, so elevation of emotional reactions, rigid routines, creativity with structures, struggles with understanding body language. They sleep more frequently. Insomnia due to masking, so they might have difficulties with sleep. Harder time with socialization and keeping friends. You're stimming, tapping, dancing, hand flapping, etc. I think the best example for this particular character would be clapping. We see this kind of often with this character, so I think that is their form of stimming, clapping in particular. I don't see anything else, but that may be on me. If you do see anything else for this character, let me know. The most obvious one was clapping. Daydreaming, food sensitivity, so being a picky eater, quote unquote. Aversion to certain clothes, textures, touch in general, controlling tendencies, and misunderstanding social norms. So another point to consider is that, again, anybody that is in that a female at birth, socialized as female category, are more likely to be misdiagnosed than boys, or anybody that socializes the opposite, right? So socializes male, masculine, more likely to be misdiagnosed than that category in particular, because studies have focused primarily on the male autistic mind. Again, we love sexism within science. No, we don't. Sarcasm. Hate that shit. Some of the disorders that girls are misdiagnosed with, and I'm saying girls generalized, would include BPD, borderline personality disorder, and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Though there are comorbidities, meaning people can have both autism and BPD. People can have both autism and OCD. When I mean misdiagnosis, I mean autism ain't even part of the picture no more. It's just like, oh, you just got BPD, girl, or you just got OCD, when it's just like, you might have both, you might have just autism. They won't know because they won't put any of the other options on the table. They just be like, bam, you automatically got BPD. Huh? No, I don't. Or come to find out, this person doesn't. It's just like, you be slapping labels. You didn't even do anything deeper. You didn't even dive deeper. It's like, okay. Crazy. Anyways, also have, another thing that we have to talk about is, because of having this neurodivergency, an unfortunate part, and this is of no blame to the person who has this neurodivergency, I blame the world. I blame, the systems of sexism that we have. Just patriarchy in a nutshell. Gotta blame it. Gotta hate it. Because of this tendency and difference in the brain, they do have, and I'm saying they, but honestly, goddamn, this is again hard to talk about. Higher risk of being sexually abused due to the misunderstanding of certain social situations, eating disorders, and anxiety and depression. This is one of those moments it's like, you gotta hate humanity sometimes. You do. Not to mention, another reason for misdiagnosis would be social norms. For example, I'm saying girls as a generalized term, that are seen as quieter or less assertive, or seen as quote unquote more feminine. Sick shit. Disgusting. So therefore, not many people would notice it as a trait. Hate it. Now, the next section that we're going to talk about right now is particularly how abuse affects specifically a child with autism. Because it's going to be a little bit different from your neurotypical individuals, even though you shouldn't be out here abusing nobody. But if you abuse someone who's neurodivergent, it will look a little different. We're going to talk about that difference right about now. So what happens when the traumatic experience of growing up as an autistic person in society designed for neurotypical individuals and combined with abuse, unfortunately? Well, this appears to be a disaster waiting to happen, as you can imagine. First, children with ASD are more prone to experience social isolation and be rejected and teased by their peers. In this particular case, there might have been a multitude of reasons, right? So like now, not only due to like looking like Kikyo, aka the person they want to reject, now on top of that, you're socially what people would consider awkward. You're out of place socially. So now you have even more of a target on your back. Like imagine all that, right? For the first Zolta kids, like you have more target on your back. Because not only do like physically and all these other things, like you don't fit, now you just act strange. Ick. Like all these traits, like all these quote unquote negative traits that we saw with your dad, if we're going to make the theory of, and this is a common theory of yeah, ASD is paternal, meaning it mostly comes from your dad or your dad's side of the family, right? So it's like, we've seen all this shit before and we hated it, so you gotta suppress it too. Yeah, no, ick. Yeah, it appears to be a disaster waiting to happen. Now you have even more of something on your back because of the social isolation and being rejected and teased by your peers. And we kind of see this, not even just with the Zoldycks, honestly, in a way, kind of see this with a lot of people within the series. And there were some moments where it's like, I think about it, it's kind of giving some ableism over there. Kind of got that ableist kick I don't like. I might point it out later, but it's like, that's kind of ableist. So again, in Illumi's situation, the bullies primarily consist of all the adults during his lifespan, which is literally the fucking worst. So children with ASD also have a tendency of becoming angry and agitated more quickly than neurotypical kids, which leads to increased social pushback and harassment. So what happens though if a child with ASD wants to report their own abuse? Well, that could be a barrier, owing to language differences interfering with reporting abuse, or it could be a challenge due to the lack of expressive reactions to the trauma in particular. So when it comes to understanding someone with ASD from their perspective, it's vital, absolutely vital, to remember the 3 cognitive styles that ASD is associated with. Limited theory of mind. I don't mean limited like anybody's like stupid or anything. Again, a lot of people who are neurodivergent are intelligent. A lot of people have normal quote unquote mindset, meaning you're not intelligent, but you're not like below intelligent either. And again, the whole nuances of academia we'll dive into like a little later in life. But for now, limited theory of mind, meaning more so like, I don't want to say black and white schema, like perfectly black and white, but there are certain things where it's like very specific, right? Very blunt, very this way of thinking, and probably like nothing else, like one-track mind is probably the best way I can explain it. One track. So weak central coherence and execution function difficulties. So with all of that in mind, right, we can now see that the neurological threshold for someone with ASD is low, which may result in, again, that hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity to senses such as hearing, for example. In the case of, the oldest, it's hyper. So it's hearing to an intense degree. It could be a mixture of both like Zoldyck genes and ASD. So now it's just like ramped up to the 11. So this may be seen as either indifference towards loud noises or painful experiences with specific sounds in general. So this difference may be perceived as jarring by just neurotypical people in general, which leads to increased mockery and antagonism towards the ASD individual, because you gotta love the world. You just do. Again, sarcasm. Hate it. As a result, this detrimental influence may alter how people with ASD manage their social interactions to avoid mockery, again, kind of altering to the point of masking. So in Illumi's instance, this could have resulted in the development of a detached and frigid perspective in order to blend in with everybody else, because everybody else has a detached and frigid perspective, so I got to too. Even if that's not actually who I am, or maybe there's like inkling showing that, oh, you're a lot softer as a person than, I give you credit for it. It's like, no, I can't be that. I have to be like this cold, dark, I don't care kind of person. But it's like, we see, particularly with this character, it's like they care a lot, right? It's like even his fiance pointed it out. It's like, you have a level of hyper empathy. It's like, you care a lot more than I do. It's like, at first, it's like, haha, jokes. But when you really think about it, not really. It's not a joke. It's like, it's there. It's just suppressed. And I think anybody that pays enough attention could tell. It's like, oh yeah, that's on some emotional suppression. It's like, it's there. It's just really shrunken. And we know the reason why is like due to survival. It's like, I have to be this way. Because if you are like this soft, full of life kind of person, as we see with Killua, it's like that doesn't really work out even if you are the favorite. Like, you might have a better experience if you're the favorite, if you are the golden child. But like, even then, it's like, eventually you're going to be this dark, cruel person, right? And it'd be like, no, that's not me. And it's like, oh, the fuck? And then shit starts getting weird again. So again, this external adverse events combined with maladaptive self-regulation makes a person with ASD more susceptible to like psychological consequences. So this can have consequences that can vary, but again, we talked about it, some of them, but let's go through the list again. Elevated anxiety levels. You got a sense overload of emotions. You got issues with attachment. We talked about it before. Compulsive behavior. We talked about some of it before. Social isolation. We talked about it. And restrictive eating. We have not talked about the restrictive eating aspect, at least not a lot, or the potential of eating disorders with this character. I will probably do a talk of a day about that, or another tea talk about it, but you know, some other time. We'll see. So this adverse factor, which is a trauma, right, can greatly alter anybody's life. It can impact someone with ASD on a greater level. And that is something that we really want to get into, and we really want to know about this character. So again, with this whole entire podcast, now that we're getting towards the end, and now that I put it brick by brick, more so the early life of Illumi, right? So we talked about everything else, and this particular podcast's purpose is to understand the foundation. I don't even think I touched on everything. I think there's a lot more stuff that I didn't talk about that maybe will come up with, again, the Zoldyck family system. Because when we talk about them as a system, talk about the, you know, how the family operates as a whole, there's probably going to be a lot of things that I didn't talk about here that will appear during that time. So if you feel like I left something out, it's probably intentional. You know, it probably is intentional. But for someone like Illumi, life wasn't just hard. It's a puzzle. It's some kind of puzzle. It's the only way to describe it for now. That could never be solved. It was digging for a treasure box where the inside was empty all along. Right? That's kind of what I want to get into. Again, that foundation with cracks. The consistent character violations, leaving internal scars like these, which then prompts a natural mistrust that we later see with Illumi's adulthood. So now you're kind of seeing how like all of it is placed together. And again, there's probably a lot of things I haven't even discussed yet, and hopefully I will get to later. And I feel like even with that, I don't even think I scratched the surface. And with all that suffering, it's like, it's gonna take like some time. And here's the thing, right, with people with like trauma/mental illnesses, it's okay if like you're not 100% healthy. First of all, I don't even think there's such a thing as a 100% healthy individual. Maybe like a good 60 to 80%, but like 100, like girl, you might as well be fucking Jesus if that's the case. Cause like living on Earth in and of itself can be considered a trauma. Living on this planet, it could be so traumatic in and of itself. Like, you might be fine, like your childhood might be fine, but you could bump into just one thing in your life and it could literally fuck you up forever. Like, it's so unpredictable being human. That's why, like, I can't judge anybody too heavy, but if I am judging somebody heavy, it's with good reasons. Like, you gotta have that discernment, but at the same time, you gotta be like, you gotta give some people grace. But with that being said, giving grace does not mean being a fucking doormat, right? Does not mean that either. It's like just because I'm giving you grace doesn't mean I'm condoning your bullshit. Like, I'm still gonna be like, hey, that ain't cool. I have enough grace to not violate you on your shit 24/7. But at the same time, you gotta have those boundaries too. And that's the hard part about balancing all of it. But yeah, that's just kind of some of the things I have to talk about with the early life of Illumi. This isn't exactly like, oh, it's an excuse. Oh, it's none of that fuck shit, you know? You gotta get to know the problem before we get to a solution. How you gonna be out here telling somebody, oh, but fix your shit, da da da. It's like, what shit do we need to fix? And when we ask that question, silence. Or, oh, we don't need to ask those questions. Well, we're never gonna get an answer then. But yeah, that's everything for this particular section. The next section is going to be the very last podcast episode, in which we talk about the solutions. Now that we talked about like all the issues, all of everything about this character, we're going to dive into like more so of the solution aspect for this character. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. And again, how I see redemption, as I talked about on my Twitter before, it's a lot different than probably a lot of people. There's a lot of traits in which is like, I don't need a character to be sterilized. I don't need them to like completely lose themselves. I just need the character to be a more balanced version of themselves. And however that looks, I mean, it really depends on the individual. That doesn't just go for this character, that goes for anybody. It's like, you just need to be a more balanced version of yourself. I don't need you to be a cookie cutter version of what society expects people to be, because society is a fucking mess and a half. I need you to be the best version of you. So whichever way that looks like for this character, we just finna see that. Yeah, that's basically the end of this episode. So I'll see y'all next time.